A journey long through paths unknown, a boy.
Welcome back to the Prima.Law podcast. I'm your host, attorney James Betzold, and today we will be talking about immigration judges losing their jobs. And they're losing their jobs not because of too many approvals or too many denials or because they're too immigrant friendly or because they're too immigrant mean. It's not because they voted for Joe Biden or because they were appointed. Well, it might be because they're appointed by Joe Biden, actually. But we're going to dig into it, okay? So we're going to find out why are immigration judges who've been working in some cases for decades as immigration judges, why are they being fired even while there's a backlog of over 1 million cases in the immigration court system? Okay, so we're going to dig into that. As always, we're brought to you by Prima.Law. Now, Prima.Law is immigration case management, so it's legal case management with all the immigration tools that you need. All the forms, all the checklists, all the workflows, all the tasks, all the tools you need to run an efficient immigration practice. Everything from billing to case management, right? We have a beautiful case management board, so you don't need Monday.com or some other third-party tool. It's all integrated into your system. Find a free trial at Prima.Law. Now, let's start the show.
Today we're looking into something, well, pretty significant happening in the nation's immigration courts. A huge shakeup.
It really is. And it's complex. You've got this administration focused on strict immigration enforcement, deportations. But at the same time, they're firing experienced immigration judges.
Right. While the case backlog is just exploding, we're talking nearly 4 million cases waiting. It seems completely contradictory. So that's what we need to unpack. Why fire judges if you want things to move faster? What's the plan to replace them? And what does this mean for, fairness and due process?
Mm-hmm. And before we even dive into the numbers, it's really important to understand the setup. These immigration judges, they handle deportation cases, removal proceedings, but they work for the Executive Office for Immigration Review, EOIR, and EOIR. It sits within the Department of Justice.
Ah, okay. So they're not like federal judges in the independent judicial branch. They're part of the executive branch.
Exactly. They're essentially DOJ employees, and that structure, that's kind of the heart of the vulnerability here. It means political shifts, administration priorities, they can directly impact the courts.
That makes sense. It sets the stage for potential conflicts. Okay, so let's get into those numbers. The backlog. You said nearly 4 million?
Yeah, the sources put it somewhere between 3.4 and 3.6 million pending cases. It's a historic high, just a mountain of cases.
And while this mountain is growing, they're losing judges.
That's the thing. Since the administration really started focusing on this, over 125 judges are gone. Some fired outright, others took voluntary resignation deals. There was even one program called, tellingly, Fork in the Road.
Wow. So the total number of judges has dropped quite a bit.
It has, from around 700 down to below 600 nationwide.
And the impact of losing, say, 120 of judges, that's significant, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many cases does one judge typically handle?
Well, estimates are around 500 to 700 cases per judge per year, sometimes more. So losing over 100 experienced people, it doesn't just slow things down, it grinds them to a halt in some places. We're hearing reports of new cases being scheduled out to, 2029?
2029. That's justice delayed to the point of potentially being denied for many people.
It really is. And the Judges Union, the National Association of Immigration Judges, they've been very vocal. Their president called the dismissals illogical and costly, and given the stated goals of enforcement, hypocritical.
So what do they think is really going on?
They argue it's political, that the firings are targeting judges hired during the last administration, specifically between 2021 and 2024. They point out many were let go without any stated cause, no misconduct cited, and many are now fighting back, calling them illegal firings.
Okay, but the administration must have some official reason, right? What's the counter-argument from EOIR?
They're framing it as an issue of performance or potentially bias. There was a memo back in August from the acting EOIR director. It talked about statistically improbable outcome metrics for some judges, things like high asylum grant rates.
Statistically improbable outcomes? So suggesting that if a judge grants asylum too often, maybe they aren't following the law correctly.
That seems to be the implication, that these stats warrant close examination and potential action. It suggests they might see certain outcomes themselves as evidence of a problem.
Which really blurs the line between impartial judging and just enforcing a particular policy outcome.
Exactly, puts pressure on judges, and you see specific examples that seem to back up the union's concerns. like in San Francisco. Sources say 7 judges were fired there, about a third of their bench.
A third? Wow.
Yeah, and 5 of those 7 apparently had higher than average asylum grant rates. San Francisco's court overall grants relief pretty often, about 71% of the time, one of the highest rates.
And were reasons given for those firings?
Reportedly, one assistant chief judge there was just fired with a 3-sentence email. No reason provided.
That certainly sends a message, doesn't it? Okay, so you fire experienced judges, create this huge gap. What's the plan to fill it? Because they still need to process cases.
Well, this is where it gets really unconventional. The proposed solution is to bring in military lawyers, JAGs.
JAGs?
Yeah.
Judge advocates from the military.
That's right. The administration authorized using up to 600 military JAGs and also some civilian attorneys to serve as temporary immigration judges.
Okay, temporary judges. But wait, does immigration law require specific expertise? I thought it was pretty complex.
It absolutely is, which makes the next part even more striking. To get these temporary judges in place quickly, the DOJ issued a new rule. It basically says any attorney can be selected.
Any attorney?
Yes. They scrapped the old requirement that temporary judges needed years of actual experience in adjudication, litigation, or specifically immigration law.
Hold on. The Supreme Court itself has called immigration law a legal specialty. It's notoriously complex. How can they just waive the experience requirement?
Well, it strongly suggests the priority isn't necessarily deep expertise, but maybe just getting bodies in seats to move cases, any cases.
And what about training? How does the training for these temporary JAG compare compare to a regular immigration judge?
It's drastically different. A standard immigration judge gets about 6 weeks of intensive training, plus a whole year of mentorship on the job. The reports suggest these temporary JAGs, who are only supposed to serve for 6 months, might only get 2 weeks of training.
2 weeks. To learn a whole specialized area of law and procedure? That seems woefully inadequate.
It raises huge red flags for legal advocates and the union.
Yeah, which brings us squarely into the concerns about due process and fairness.
Yeah.
You mentioned the complexity. Can you give us a sense of why it's so specialized? It's not like traffic court, right?
Oh, absolutely not. You're dealing with thousands of pages of statutes, regulations, case law that's constantly changing. Judges have to figure out which laws apply, look for exceptions, waivers, different forms of relief. Think about asylum cases. To grant asylum, someone has to prove a well-founded fear of persecution based on one of 5 grounds: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group.
And defining that last one, particular social group, that sounds tricky.
It's incredibly complex. Is a family a social group? Are former police officers targeted by gangs a social group? Deciding that requires deep legal analysis, knowing decades of specific case precedents.
And we're expecting military lawyers, potentially with just 2 weeks of training, to make those calls.
That's precisely the fear. Legal advocates argue that JAGs, however capable in their own field, just aren't qualified for this specific, highly specialized role. They lack the necessary background in immigration or administrative law,
which directly impacts the person standing before them. The Fifth Amendment guarantees due process, a fair trial, and a fair tribunal.
Exactly. And if the judge doesn't fully grasp the law or can't properly assess the evidence because they lack expertise, is that really a fair hearing?
Especially when the stakes are so incredibly high. We're talking about deportation, potentially back to dangerous situations, or families being separated forever.
Right. These aren't minor decisions. They are life-altering.
Beyond just the lack of specialized training, there's another layer of concern with using military officers, right? Something about their obligations.
Yes, a major legal and ethical issue. JAG officers remain subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ. And a core principle of the UCMJ is that they must obey lawful orders from their military superiors.
Okay, I see the problem. How can you be an impartial, independent civilian judge if you're simultaneously under military command and required to obey orders?
It creates a fundamental tension. Can they maintain the necessary judicial independence? As one former immigration judge put it quite starkly, the boss of the prosecutor should not be the boss of the judge.
And in this system, EOIR is under the DOJ, which is also where the government's attorneys, the ICE prosecutors, work. So the judge's ultimate boss is arguably the same as the prosecutor's boss.
Correct. And adding the UCMJ obligation on top of that just seems to critics like it compounds the lack of structural independence. It looks less like a court and more like an enforcement tool.
Are there also questions about whether this whole plan is even, well, legal under existing laws?
There are. Critics are raising two main legal challenges. First, the Posse Comitatus Act.
Right, that's the law that generally stops the military from being used for civilian law enforcement. How does it apply here?
The argument is that having active duty military personnel adjudicate civilian immigration cases, essentially deciding who gets deported, crosses that line. It's using the armed forces for a domestic civilian administrative function, which critics say violates the spirit, if not the letter, of Posse Comitatus.
Okay, that's one potential legal hurdle. What's the other one?
It's about money and authorization. The Economy Act apparently sets limits on how many immigration judges the DOJ can fund. Sources suggest that cap is around 800 judges total.
And how many do they have now, even after the firings?
Still somewhere below 700, maybe around 680 or so, which means there's only room under that cap for about 120 new judges, not the 600 temporary JAGs the administration authorized.
So how would they get around that cap?
The administration might argue these aren't permanent hires, they're just temporary details, so the cap doesn't apply in the same way. But that's definitely a contested legal interpretation.
So looking at the whole picture, firing experienced judges, particularly those granting asylum more often, and then trying to replace them with temporary, less trained military personnel who might lack independence. Critics see a pattern here, don't they?
They absolutely do. They see it as a deliberate strategy. First, remove judges perceived as obstacles to the administration's enforcement goals. Second, replace them with personnel potentially more aligned with, or at least less equipped to challenge those goals. The overall effect, they argue, is to dismantle judicial independence in these courts, centralize control within the executive branch, and transform the system into something purely focused on enforcement, not impartial adjudication.
And the result could just be chaos.
That's the prediction from some longtime observers. Less expertise, more errors, fewer procedural safeguards. It likely means many more appeals. As one judge reportedly said, it will make appeals go wild. The problem just gets pushed up the chain to appellate courts, creating new bottlenecks.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The structure of the courts under the DOJ, the massive backlog, the controversial firings based on outcome metrics, and this really radical plan to use temporary military lawyers with minimal training.
Yeah, and the serious legal and ethical questions that raises about due process, judicial independence, and even basic legality under existing acts like Posse Comitatus and the Economy Act.
So what's the big takeaway for you, for our listeners? What does this all signify?
I think it really highlights just how vulnerable these administrative courts are. Because they sit within the executive branch, they're incredibly susceptible to political winds and policy agendas, personnel decisions, funding, priorities. They can all be shifted rapidly based on who is in power in a way that just wouldn't happen in the independent federal judiciary. We're seeing that play out right now.
It's a stark reminder of why the separation of powers is so fundamental. And for a final thought to leave our listeners with, you mentioned something a judge said.
Yes, a longtime immigration judge made this observation. Immigration courts are the canaries in the coal mine.
The canaries in the coal mine, meaning a warning sign.
Exactly. If basic due process protections, if judicial independence can be eroded so significantly in this administrative system through firings, through replacements, lacking qualifications, under political pressure, what does that tell us about potential risks elsewhere? Could similar pressures be applied to other courts, other protections, even those for U.S. citizens, if the political will is there?
That is definitely something to think about. A really sobering perspective on why the integrity of even these specialized courts matters so much.
All right, and that is going to wrap up our discussion about immigration judges losing their jobs for arbitrary and capricious reasons, it looks like, or for politically motivated reasons today. Now, before we go, I just do want to point out, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Subscribing to this podcast is going to make sure that when new episodes are released, you'll get notified of them right away, and you can benefit from all the fun information we're going to be sharing here, as we have been. Practice management tips, right? Immigration practice tips, new information about different visas, how to apply for them, who would apply for them, things like that. So just general immigration knowledge, news, and practice management help. And again, we're brought to you by Prima.Law, which is immigration case management for immigration professionals. That's attorneys, paralegals, anyone who's licensed to practice law or to practice immigration can benefit from our wealthy library of checklists, case types, templates, everything that we have to help you assemble your immigration petitions and get those approved quickly the first time. All right, so find a free 15-day trial at Prima.Law. Subscribe, and we will see you next time.